You're not welcome here. Those were the first words my cousin said to me the morning of my grandmother's funeral. Not hello. Not, I'm sorry for your loss. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Just 4 cold words, delivered like a verdict. And the strange part? I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even ask why. I just nodded, turned around, and walked away. Because I already knew something my cousin didn't. The family lawyer was arriving in 20 minutes. And when he opened my grandmother's will, everything was going to change. But before we get there, let me ask you something. What would you do if someone tried to kick you out of your own grandmother's funeral? Would you fight back? Call them out in front of everyone? Cause a scene? Or would you walk away quietly, knowing the truth would come out soon enough? Because that's exactly what I did. And trust me, what happened next made that quiet walk the most satisfying decision of my life. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and until that morning, I thought I understood my family. I was wrong. My grandmother, Margaret Lawson, was 82 when she passed away. In our small town, she wasn't just another elderly woman who lived quietly until the end. She was the center of everything. Birthday dinners happened at her house. Christmas mornings happened at her house. Even family arguments usually ended with someone saying, "Let's ask Grandma Margaret what she thinks." She had this way of making people calm down without raising her voice. The kind of quiet authority that only comes from living a long life and watching people make the same mistakes over and over again. And for most of my childhood, she was more than just my grandmother. She was the person who raised me. When I was 10 years old, my mother got sick. Long hospital stays. Treatments that kept her away from home for months. During that time, I lived almost entirely with Grandma Margaret. She helped me with homework, packed my lunches, sat in the front row of every school play and every awkward middle school choir concert. So when people said she was my grandmother, technically they were right. But in my heart, she was something closer to a second mother. Which is why the morning of her funeral felt so unreal. The church parking lot was already full when I arrived. Gray clouds hung low in the sky, and a slow drizzle had started falling, the kind of cold rain that soaks into everything without making much noise. People stood near the entrance talking quietly. Black coats, umbrellas, soft voices, all the familiar rituals of grief. But the moment I stepped out of my car, something felt off. You know that feeling when a room goes quiet for just half a second after you walk in? That happened. 2 of my cousins stopped talking and glanced at me. My Aunt Linda looked down at the ground as if she suddenly found the pavement very interesting. And then I saw him. Derek Lawson. My cousin. 38 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, standing near the church doors like he was guarding them. Derek had always carried himself with this strange confidence, the kind that sometimes crossed the line into arrogance. But that morning, he looked almost smug. When he saw me walking toward the entrance, he stepped forward, directly into my path. And then he said it. "You're not welcome here." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. But the way he folded his arms told me I hadn't. "Excuse me," I said. His voice stayed calm. Too calm. "Grandma made it clear who she wanted around her at the end," Derek said. "And it wasn't you." Behind him, I could see relatives pretending not to watch. My aunt, my other cousins, family friends. No one stepped in. No one said a word. Derek leaned a little closer. "You stopped visiting," he added. "You moved away. You barely called." His voice lowered even more. "And now you want to show up and pretend you cared?" That accusation hung in the air like smoke. Here's the strange thing, though. Part of what he said was technically true. 3 years earlier, I had moved 2 hours away for a teaching job. Life got busy. Work got overwhelming. I didn't visit as often as I should have. And Derek knew that. But what he didn't know was what had happened 2 weeks before my grandmother died. 2 weeks earlier, I had visited her alone. She looked frail that day, but her mind was sharp as ever. We talked for almost an hour. About memories. About family. About the future. And right before I left, she said something that confused me at the time. Emily, she told me quietly, when the time comes, don't argue with anyone. I remember frowning. What do you mean? She smiled. That small, knowing smile she used when she already understood something no one else had figured out yet. Just promise me, she said. Promise you'll wait. Standing outside the church that morning, Derek blocking the door, those words suddenly made sense. So instead of arguing, instead of embarrassing him in front of everyone, I did exactly what my grandmother told me to do. I nodded. Okay, I said. Then I turned around and walked back toward the parking lot. Behind me, I heard murmurs of confusion. I imagined Derek expected a fight, a dramatic confrontation. But he didn't get one. Because while he was standing there feeling victorious, I knew something he didn't. In exactly 20 minutes, the family lawyer would arrive. And when he opened my grandmother's will, Derek Lawson's smile was going to disappear. But what none of us realized yet was just how big that moment was going to be. Because my grandmother hadn't just written a will. She had planned something far more complicated. And what the lawyer was about to reveal would expose a secret that had been hiding inside our family for months. A secret Derek never thought anyone would uncover. But what happened next? What if everyone in your family believed you were the villain? Not because of something you actually did, but because someone else told the story first. That's exactly what happened to me. As I sat in my car outside the church parking lot, watching the rain slide slowly down the windshield, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Derek had been preparing for this. Not just the funeral. The narrative. Because the moment he told me I wasn't welcome, I realized something important. He wasn't improvising. He sounded rehearsed. And the way the rest of my family reacted, the silence, the awkward looks, the refusal to defend me, told me something even worse. They believed him. Think about that for a second. What would someone have to say about you to convince an entire room full of relatives that you didn't deserve to attend your own grandmother's funeral? The answer, I later learned, was surprisingly simple. All Derek had to do was tell a story that sounded believable. And he had been telling that story for months. According to Derek, I had slowly distanced myself from the family. Which, technically, wasn't a lie. 3 years earlier, I moved 2 hours away to take a job as an elementary school teacher. It wasn't some glamorous career move. Just a steady job in a quiet town where the school district needed teachers. But distance does strange things to family dynamics. Phone calls get shorter. Visits get less frequent. Before you know it, people start filling the silence with their own assumptions. And Derek took full advantage of that. He told relatives that I had become too busy for the family. That I rarely checked on Grandma Margaret. That I didn't show up for holidays anymore. None of those things were entirely true, but they weren't entirely false either. And that's what made his version of the story so convincing. Because the most effective lies always hide inside partial truths. But Derek didn't stop there. No. He added something far more damaging. He told people that the last time I visited my grandmother, we had argued about money. That I had pressured her about inheritance. That I had been disappointed by what she planned to leave me. Let that sink in for a moment. In Derek's version of events, I wasn't just distant. I was greedy, selfish, ungrateful. And once that idea took hold in people's minds, everything else became easier to believe. Why would someone like that deserve a place at the funeral? Why should someone who only cared about money get to stand beside the family during the final goodbye? So when Derek blocked the church door that morning, most people probably thought he was protecting my grandmother's dignity. But the reality was very different. Because the last time I visited my grandmother, there was no argument. Not even close. In fact, the visit had been strangely peaceful. It happened exactly 2 weeks before she died. I remember the date clearly because it was a Saturday morning, and the air had that early autumn chill that always reminded her of baking season. Her house smelled like cinnamon when I walked in. Grandma Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Her silver hair pulled back the way she always wore it. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. But when she saw me, her face lit up. "Emily," she said softly. We talked for a long time that day. About school. About the kids in my class. About the ridiculous amount of paperwork teachers deal with now compared to when she was young. But eventually the conversation shifted. And she started asking unusual questions. Questions that felt deliberate. "Have you heard from Derek lately?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not really." "Why?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stirred her tea slowly, staring into the cup like she was watching something important unfold. Then she asked another question. "Has anyone been saying strange things about me?" That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She looked up. Her eyes were sharp, alert. The same eyes she had when she used to figure out family arguments before anyone else even noticed there was a problem. "Oh, just gossip," she said quietly. Then she changed the subject. Or at least, that's what I thought she did. Because about 15 minutes later, right before I left, she handed me something. A small white envelope. My name was written on the front in her careful handwriting. "Don't open it yet," she said. I laughed. "Grandma, that sounds mysterious." She smiled. But it wasn't her usual warm smile. This one was different. Almost cautious. "Emily," she said gently, "when the time comes, people might say things about you." I frowned. What people? But she didn't answer that question. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. And then she said the sentence that had been echoing in my mind all morning. "When the time comes, don't argue." I remember thinking it was strange advice. But I promised her anyway. Because when someone who has lived 82 years asks you to trust them, you usually do. Now fast forward back to the funeral parking lot. Rain tapping softly against my windshield. Relatives filing slowly into the church. And Derek standing near the entrance like a man who believed he had already won. Inside that church, the service was starting. Prayers. Music. Eulogies. The final goodbye. And I wasn't there for any of it. But here's the part Derek never considered. My grandmother was the most observant person I had ever known. She noticed everything. Little changes in behavior. The way someone's tone shifted when money came up. The subtle tension between relatives that others ignored. And if she had started asking those strange questions 2 weeks before she died, then something must have happened before that. Something serious enough to make her prepare. Because Margaret Lawson didn't do anything without a reason. Which meant the envelope sitting on my passenger seat right now probably wasn't just a letter. And as I stared at it, debating whether to open it early, something else caught my attention. A black sedan had just pulled into the church parking lot. I recognized the driver immediately. Daniel Whitaker, my grandmother's lawyer. He had handled her legal affairs for more than 25 years. And judging by the thick folder he carried under his arm, he wasn't here just to pay his respects. He was here for the will reading. Inside the church, Derek was probably smiling right now. Confident. Certain that everything my grandmother owned was about to become his. But there was something Derek didn't know. 3 weeks before my grandmother died, she met with Daniel Whitaker privately. No family members. No witnesses. Just the two of them. And whatever happened during that meeting was about to turn the entire family upside down. But the moment that changed everything didn't start inside the church. It started with a phone call. And when my phone suddenly vibrated in the cup holder beside me, the name on the screen made my heart skip. Daniel Whitaker. And the first words he said when I answered were something Derek definitely didn't expect. "Emily, where are you? Emily, where are you?" The rain was still tapping against my windshield when I heard Daniel Whitaker's voice through the phone. Calm. Professional. But with a hint of urgency. "I'm outside," I said slowly. There was a brief pause. Then he asked the question that made my stomach tighten. "Why aren't you inside with the family?" For a second, I considered explaining everything. Derek blocking the door. The accusation. The silent stares from everyone else. But something about the moment made me keep the answer simple. I was told I wasn't welcome. Another pause. Longer this time. And when Daniel Whitaker spoke again, his voice sounded different. Confused. "That's not possible," he said. "What do you mean?" "The will can't be read until you're in the room." I blinked. "What?" "I'm serious," he said. Your grandmother was very specific about that. All primary parties must be present. Primary parties. That phrase echoed in my head like a riddle. Because as far as I knew, I wasn't a primary party in anything, which meant one of two things was happening. Either my grandmother had changed something in her will, or Derek had misunderstood something in a very big way. Give me 2 minutes, the lawyer said. Come inside. The call ended, and suddenly the quiet comfort of sitting in my car didn't feel like an option anymore. I grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat, slipped it into my purse, and stepped back out into the cold rain. As I walked toward the church doors again, I could feel the weight of dozens of conversations happening inside. Low voices. Murmurs. The awkward social shuffle that happens after funerals when people don't quite know what to say next. But the moment I stepped through the entrance, the room went silent. Again. And Derek noticed me immediately. He was standing near the front of the hall, beside a long wooden table where several chairs had been arranged. My Aunt Linda sat there. My cousin Jessica, too. A few other relatives stood along the walls. And at the center of it all was Daniel Whitaker, holding a thick folder of documents. Derek's expression shifted the second he saw me. First confusion, then irritation, then something closer to anger. He walked toward me quickly. What are you doing here? He demanded quietly. I didn't answer, because Daniel Whitaker had already noticed the tension. Emily, the lawyer said, raising a hand slightly. Thank you for coming. Derek turned toward him immediately. Wait, he said. Why is she here? Daniel adjusted his glasses and looked around the room. Because Margaret Lawson specifically requested that Emily Carter be present when her will is read. The words hung in the air. And suddenly every pair of eyes in the room shifted toward me. I saw confusion on my aunt's face. Jessica's eyebrows lifted slightly. Even Derek looked caught off guard for a moment. But only for a moment. Then he scoffed. That doesn't make any sense, he said. Grandma barely saw her the last few years. Daniel didn't react. He simply opened the folder and removed a document. Margaret left clear instructions, he said calmly. And I intend to follow them exactly. The room grew quiet again. You could practically hear the curiosity building. Because suddenly the story Derek had been telling everyone didn't fit the situation anymore. If my grandmother didn't care about me, why insist that I be present? Derek crossed his arms. Well, fine, he muttered. Let's just get this over with. Daniel nodded slightly. Everyone took seats around the table. I sat near the end, feeling the strange weight of every glance in the room. Then the lawyer began. As you all know, Daniel said, Margaret Lawson passed away peacefully last week at the age of 82. His voice was steady, practiced. The tone of someone who had done this many times before. Today we will review the final version of her will, signed and notarized 3 weeks before her passing. 3 weeks. I saw Derek shift slightly in his chair at that. Because earlier he had been telling people something different. He had claimed the will was changed 6 months ago. But Daniel continued before anyone could question it. The document outlines several personal bequests. He flipped the page. To Linda Lawson, he said, glancing toward my aunt, Margaret leaves her collection of antique jewelry. My aunt looked surprised, then emotional. That includes the sapphire necklace she inherited from her mother. Linda covered her mouth with one hand. Thank you, she whispered softly. Daniel turned another page. To Jessica Lawson, Margaret leaves the family photo albums and scrapbooks. Jessica smiled faintly. I'm glad she did that, she said. She knew you'd take care of them, Daniel replied. So far, everything seemed normal. Predictable. The small sentimental gifts families usually pass down. I glanced toward Derek. And sure enough, his confidence had returned. Because the big thing hadn't been mentioned yet. The house. Margaret's house sat on nearly 3 acres of land. Paid off decades ago. In a town where property values had quietly risen over the last 10 years. The house alone was worth several $100,000. And Derek had been living there for the past year. Taking care of Grandma. Helping with errands. Handling her bills. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Daniel turned another page. Then paused. The room went still. because the shift in tone was immediate. Before addressing the remaining estate, he said slowly, "Margaret asked that a written statement be read aloud." He unfolded a single sheet of paper, and something about the careful way he held it made the tension in the room spike instantly. Because suddenly this didn't feel like a normal reading anymore. Daniel cleared his throat. This statement was written by Margaret Lawson and attached to the final version of the will. He began reading. "If you're hearing this message," the letter said, "then my family has gathered together after I am gone." The room stayed silent. But I noticed Derek leaning forward slightly. Curious. Still confident. Daniel continued. "By now, some of you may have already decided who deserves what." Another pause. Then the next line. "And that is exactly why I needed to make certain decisions before my passing." Derek frowned. Daniel turned the page. Then he read the sentence that made the entry. "Someone had been taking money from my grandmother. Slowly. Carefully. Over time." When Daniel Whitaker read those words out loud, the room changed instantly. You could feel it. The air felt heavier. Tighter. Because until that moment, everyone assumed this was going to be a routine will reading. A few sentimental items. The house. Maybe some quiet disagreements afterward. Normal family drama. But this? This was something else entirely. Daniel continued reading from the letter. "Over the last year, my grandmother had written, I noticed small withdrawals from my accounts that I did not authorize." The lawyer paused briefly. "And I noticed several relatives glance at each other. Because the implication was obvious. Someone close to her had access to those accounts. Someone who handled her finances. Someone she trusted." Daniel kept reading. "At first I assumed I had simply forgotten about the transactions," the letter said. "But after reviewing my records more carefully, I realized the pattern was too consistent to be a mistake." The word pattern landed heavily. Because patterns mean intention, not accidents. Then Daniel said something that made my heart start beating faster. "Margaret asked me to arrange an independent financial review of her accounts," he explained. Independent. Which meant no family involvement. No one could interfere. The lawyer lifted a small stack of documents from the folder. "These records show multiple withdrawals over the past 12 months, he said calmly. "Each one small enough not to raise immediate alarms." The room stayed silent. But everyone was thinking the same thing. Who? Then Daniel read the next line of my grandmother's letter. "When I realized what was happening, I decided not to confront the person responsible immediately." That surprised me. Because if Grandma had known someone was stealing from her, why stay quiet? Daniel continued. "Instead, I chose to observe." Observe. That word made the entire situation feel much bigger. Because it meant my grandmother hadn't just discovered the problem. She had been studying it. Watching. Learning. The lawyer read on. "I wanted to see what that person would do if they believed no one was watching." I glanced around the room. My aunt looked confused. Jessica looked uneasy. But Derek had gone completely still. His confident posture had disappeared. And the color had drained slightly from his face. Daniel flipped to the next page. "I also wanted to see how that person would behave after I was gone." The room was absolutely silent now. Because suddenly everyone understood what this letter was. It wasn't just a message. It was a test. A test my grandmother had designed months before she died. Daniel lowered the page slightly and looked toward Derek. Not accusingly. Just calmly. But the tension was obvious. Then he read the next sentence. "Money has a way of revealing people's true character." I felt something shift inside my chest when I heard that. Because it sounded exactly like something my grandmother would say. Simple. Direct. But painfully accurate. Daniel continued. "If the person responsible showed honesty and respect after my passing, I intended to handle the situation quietly." Another pause. "But if they chose greed." The lawyer didn't finish the sentence immediately. He simply looked back down at the letter. And then he read the final line of that section. "Then the truth would reveal itself without my help." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Because now everyone was thinking about Derek blocking the church doors earlier. Telling me I wasn't welcome. Acting like he controlled everything. Suddenly, that behavior looked very different. Daniel carefully set the letter down. Then he spoke directly to the room. The financial review Margaret requested traced the withdrawals to one person. No one moved. No one even breathed loudly. And Derek's hands slowly tightened into fists on the table. Daniel continued. The transactions were made using online access tied to Margaret's home computer. Everyone knew what that meant. Derek had been living in the house for the past year. He was the one helping her pay bills, managing paperwork, running errands, handling the accounts. Daniel lifted another document. The total amount withdrawn over 12 months was $42,000. A gasp came from somewhere behind me. 42,000. Not a small mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A deliberate, long-term theft. Derek suddenly pushed his chair back. This is ridiculous, he snapped. His voice echoed sharply across the room. You're seriously accusing me right now? Daniel didn't raise his voice. He simply adjusted the papers in front of him. I am not making accusations, he said calmly. I am reading Margaret Lawson's documented findings. Derek shook his head. This is insane, he said. Grandma trusted me. That is correct, Daniel replied. And according to her letter, that trust was the reason she wanted the truth confirmed before confronting you. The room felt like it was shrinking. Everyone was staring at Derek now. My aunt, Jessica, even a couple of distant relatives who had been standing quietly along the wall. Derek looked around the room wildly. Then his eyes landed on me. And the anger in them was immediate. You did this, he said. The accusation came out fast. Sharp. Like he had been holding it in. You turned her against me. I blinked in surprise. Derek, You're the one who came back suddenly, he interrupted. You're the one whispering in her ear. Daniel cleared his throat gently. Emily Carter was not present during the financial review, he said. In fact, Margaret specifically handled the investigation privately. Derek's breathing had become heavier now. Like someone realizing the floor beneath them wasn't as solid as they thought. But Daniel wasn't finished. Because the will itself still hadn't been read. And the biggest revelation of the day was still coming. The lawyer opened the final section of the document. Then he said the sentence Derek had been waiting to hear all morning. The remaining estate, including the house, the land, and the primary savings accounts. Derek leaned forward again. For just a second, the old confidence flickered back. Because he still believed one thing. After everything he had done for Grandma, she would still choose him. But the next words Daniel Whitaker read shattered that belief completely. Will be transferred in full to Emily Carter. The room exploded with shocked voices. And Derek Lawson's smile disappeared instantly. But what none of them knew yet was that my grandmother had left one final message just for me. A message that would explain everything. And when I finally opened the envelope she gave me 2 weeks before she died, the truth inside would make Derek's situation even worse. Will be transferred in full to Emily Carter. For a moment, the room didn't react. It was like everyone needed a second to process what they had just heard. The house, the land, the savings, everything left to me. Then the whispers started. Confused voices. Questions. My Aunt Linda leaned back in her chair slowly, her eyes moving between me and the lawyer like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Jessica looked stunned. And Derek. Derek looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under him. You've got to be kidding me, he said quietly. No one answered. Because Daniel Whitaker simply closed the document and folded his hands calmly on the table. The will is legally binding, he said. Derek stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly across the floor. This is ridiculous, he snapped. She would never leave everything to her. He pointed at me like I had just robbed a bank in front of everyone. Daniel didn't react emotionally. That calm professionalism never left his voice. The will was signed 3 weeks ago, he said. Witnessed by 2 notaries and recorded properly. It has already been verified. Derek's jaw tightened. You're telling me my grandmother just cut the rest of the family out, he said. No, Daniel replied. She made a decision based on the information she had. That sentence hit harder than anyone expected. Because suddenly it wasn't about favoritism. It was about consequences. The room had gone very quiet again. You could almost hear people rethinking everything Derek had told them over the past few months. All the conversations, all the assumptions, all the times they had believed his version of the story. And now the entire narrative had collapsed. Derek turned toward me again. The anger was still there, but something else had joined it now. Fear. "You think this means you won," he said. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope my grandmother had given me. The same envelope that had been sitting in my car the entire time. The room noticed. A few people leaned forward slightly. Because suddenly everyone realized something important. There might be more to the story. "I haven't opened this yet," I said quietly. Derek scoffed. "What, another secret message?" I ignored him. Carefully, I slid my finger under the edge of the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. My grandmother's handwriting covered the page. I took a breath before reading it, because suddenly the room felt very still. And in that moment, I felt like my grandmother was somehow still guiding everything. The letter began simply, "Emily, if you are reading this, then the family has gathered and the will has been opened." I swallowed. Her words felt calm, familiar, like hearing her voice again. I imagine some people may be surprised by what they heard today. A few relatives shifted slightly in their chairs. "I want you to understand something very important," the letter continued. "This decision was never about choosing one grandchild over another." I looked up briefly. Several people were listening closely now. Then I read the next line. "It was about trust.